Welcome back to A Slice of News, where I cut you off a slice of news. In a recent survey, only 27% of Americans said they approved of the current military actions that the administration is taking in Iran, while over 40% said that they disapprove. I think it's safe to say that on the whole, the war in Iran is not especially popular amongst the majority of Americans, which is really not all that unexpected. While the average person may not be well versed in international politics and the interplay between foreign leaders, what they do understand is the fact that gas prices have surged as a result of this conflict, and the stock market, the thing that the administration has so often pushed as evidence that everything is great, has been volatile. And even if they don't have any personal stake in the stock market, if they see those fluctuations, even they can tell that there's something going on and it doesn't seem very good. But while the 27% in that survey are certainly the most diehard and loyal of the president's supporters, the currently ongoing military conflict in Iran may be costing the president quite a bit of support amongst those who formerly had his back. While many of them voted for him due to his promises on domestic policies and issues, the one thing they did not want was international military conflict. And the president campaigned on being the president of peace and no new wars. To those who voted for him based on those promises and claims are feeling very disappointed, angry, and betrayed by him basically doing the exact opposite of what he said he would do and getting us into what may be yet another forever war in the Middle East. Now, I think one could certainly question whether he ever genuinely had any intention to make good on those promises and claims that he would not start any wars and that he would be committed to preventing them. And I would, of course, argue that he did not. But the reality is that many voters were taken in by those assurances and are now feeling incredibly disillusioned and betrayed by his breaking of those promises, leaving them to break away from him. Something that's very bad for a party that needs every vote they can get in these upcoming midterm elections. The Republican Party, on the other hand, is hoping that their voters are willing to accept at least some casualties, as long as it is a clear path to peace in the long term, and they can retain the support of those voters that might otherwise turn away from them as a result of this. And surprisingly, that might not actually be an entirely misguided assumption. There's definitely a sentiment on the right that sometimes the only path to peace is through force. If you can't negotiate peace and stability in a civil way, the only way is through violence. Sure, they don't want American servicemen to die. They don't want the death of civilians. But if that is the price that must be paid to de-Islamify Iran and to bring stability to the region, they feel that maybe it's worth paying. I would say a solid counterpoint to that is that that was exactly the rhetoric coming out of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars of the early 2000s. That while the conflicts were terrible and causing scores of lives, they would all be worth it to bring peace and stability to those regions, and that both they and us would be better off for having done so. But 2.5 decades after the Iraq War started, and over 20 years after Afghanistan, it's hard to argue that those regions are better and more stable thanks to our military intervention there. If anything, the notion that you can kill for peace in the Middle East has been entirely disproven just right there. And so why they would fall for the exact same lies that they did 20 years ago, and why they would think that the result would be any different than it was back then, I'm not really sure. But I suppose learning from history was never their strong suit. So I guess the question still remains, are a lot of the Trump voters still willing to believe in the president and his claims of a 4-week timetable to finish up the conflict in Iran? Or will this finally be the thing that starts to really pull people away from him and the Republican Party in large numbers, now that many of those voters may be looking at sending their own sons and daughters to fight and possibly die in a foreign conflict the man they voted for assured them he would not pursue? I think it really is harder to say than I would think. I would have assumed something like the Epstein files would have been the thing that would finally decouple them from the Trump train. But while that didn't turn out to be the wake-up call it should have been, maybe this will be. They could maybe find a way to ignore higher gas prices or an inconsistent stock market But when it comes to having to send their child off to war, a war that they were told was not going to happen because their peace president would not allow it, maybe that's finally what breaks the spell. And they see the president for what he truly is, possibly for the first time, causing them to finally reject him and his authoritarian warmongering agenda. It would obviously be far too much to hope that this would go even further and cause them to switch sides entirely. But when it comes time to vote again in November, rather than vote for more Republicans and more of what we're currently experiencing, they may just decide to stay home entirely. And many of the Republican Party's desperately needed votes simply will not come in. The last year has proven time and time again how hard it is for the president to lose his hardcore supporters. No matter what he does, it seems like they simply will stand by him no matter what and find some sort of explanation or excuse to get him out of what would for any other president be a career-ending event. So the fact that we're even considering that this Iran conflict may be something that pushes a large portion of them away from him at long last is really saying something. His followers have been willing to accept and believe just about every lie that came out of that man's mouth, no matter how obviously false or deceptive they would be. But maybe breaking that promise of no foreign wars will finally be the one that breaks them. I often try to see other perspectives, put myself in their metaphorical shoes, and try to see things from their point of view to get on a better sense of sort of why things are the way they are through their eyes. In this case, trying to put myself in the perspective of one of these possible Trump defectors is a little difficult, since to get to that point, it would have necessitated me to do and think a lot of things that go entirely against what I actually think and believe. But if I did find my way to embodying that persona, I think I would definitely be looking at this current military action overseas in Iran and really feeling a great deal of reservation. Not getting us into foreign combat situations was one of the cornerstones of a second-term campaign. One of the reasons to vote for him over Kamala was that she was definitely going to get us into foreign wars. So if you didn't want foreign wars, voting for Trump was the way to go. But now he's telling me not only do we have to go to foreign war, but foreign war is good and necessary, and now the only path forward for peace in Iran. It's a total bait and switch. I was sold on one thing and given another. Of course I'm going to feel betrayed and lied to. I don't like feeling duped, and Trump duped me hard. And of course it's super easy for actual me to come in and say, well, of course he did. That's all he ever does. Lying and betraying is his game plan and always has been. Donald Trump is like a Bizarro from Superman, and you have to just expect the opposite of everything he says. If he pushed that he would not get into a foreign war, that means he was going to get into a foreign war. If he said electing him was going to be good for the national economy, it means it was probably going to be bad, and so far it looks like he has been. Admittedly, I can only go so far into putting myself in the mindset of a person who is willing to be duped and tricked by a known con man and liar over and over and over again, and expecting actually maybe this time is the one time he's actually being truthful and honest. I want to at least try to be understanding and not immediately roll my eyes and say, how could you possibly believe a single promise he gave to you, especially when he spent an entire 4-year period not delivering on those promises. Sometimes it really does feel like the average Trump voter is like the child touching the hot stove, burning their hand and saying, surely this time that I touch it, it will not be hot, and I will not burn myself. And every single time they do. Except for that in reality, it's the entire country that's being burned. So even those of us who are telling them, don't touch that, it's hot, you'll burn yourself, are suffering all the same. And for a while now, that's been a very hard space for me to live in, because I do not like suffering for the mistakes of others. But in this ship we call America, if we start to sink, we all sink together, no matter which side of the political aisle we sit on. So where goes one goes all, as they say, even if that one is a hardcore red hat. I would say unquestionably it is impossible to predict the long-term domestic and international effects the Iranian conflict are going to have, or even just how long it's going to last. So it's equally impossible to know for sure just how much of an effect it's going to have on conservative voters 8 months from now when they're voting in the midterms. Voters, especially Republican voters, often have a very short memory, and it could very well be that their anger and betrayal that they're feeling now may be largely forgotten by then, and they'll be perfectly willing to get into that voting booth and vote red like none of this is happening right now. But I choose to hold out hope that that's not what's going to happen, and they will still remember, and that betrayal will give them pause and make them not just do what they always do. I sadly have no doubt that the loss of life during this conflict will be tremendous, and whatever stability and peace is established there once it's all over will have been written in blood. And my only hope is they recall that and realize it was not worth it and vote accordingly. Right now that feels like almost wishful thinking, but I can only believe that in time it will be proven not to have been, and that real genuine change is on the horizon. But for that, only time will tell. Alright guys, that'll be it for this episode of A Slice of News. I've been your host, Mr. Slice, and until next time, when I cut you off, another slice of news. And don't forget to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find it.